in the sprawling marketplace of Kumasi, where the morning sun painted everything gold and merchants called out their wares like a symphony of commerce, there lived a man whose name would soon become synonymous with deceit, greed, and one of the most shocking transformations the kingdom had ever witnessed. His name is Kwesi, and he is about to learn that some prices cannot be paid with money alone.
Fair African Tales. Subscribe and turn on the bell for new stories.
The morning sun rises over Kumasi, painting everything gold as merchants call out their wares like a symphony of commerce. A man named Kwesi stands in the heart of the sprawling marketplace, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction, his pockets growing heavier with each passing hour. What no one realizes is that Kwesi is about to become the subject of the most shocking transformation the kingdom has ever witnessed. A reckoning that arrives with terrifying precision before the sun rises again. The marketplace of Kumasi pulses with life and energy, a place where traders from distant lands converge to buy, sell, and exchange the treasures of the known world. Spices from the east fill the air with exotic aromas. Fabrics from distant kingdoms hang like jeweled tapestries between wooden stalls, and gold glints from every corner. A testament to the region's legendary wealth. This is where fortunes get made and lost in single transactions, where reputations build on trust and shatter in moments of betrayal. The marketplace beats like the heart of Kumasi itself, and everyone who trades here understands one immutable truth: integrity holds more value than gold. Kwesi wasn't always a deceiver. Years ago, he measured fabrics fairly. He never shortchanged his customers. He took pride in every piece of cloth he sold. But something changes inside him, something dark that eats away at his conscience like rust through metal. Ambition twists into obsession. He watches other merchants grow wealthy while he remains merely comfortable, and the sight gnaws at him day and night. His rationalizations transform wrong into seeming right, deception into clever business. The honest cloth merchant dies inside, replaced by a man willing to do anything, absolutely anything, to accumulate wealth beyond measure. Kwesi's scheme emerges as elegant in its simplicity and ruthless in its execution. He begins to adulterate his fabrics, mixing cheaper cloth with premium materials and selling them at premium prices. The finest indigo cloth imported across the trade routes gets carefully unraveled and mixed with locally produced inferior fabric, then rewoven with such skill that the deception nearly disappears to the untrained eye. A customer purchases what they believe is expensive silk from the distant north, only to discover weeks later that the fabric has begun to deteriorate, the colours running, the threads becoming weak and brittle. By then, Kwesi has moved on, his money already spent on expanding his stall and purchasing more materials for his fraudulent enterprise. His deception doesn't end with fabric adulteration. Kwesi develops an entire system of fraud that breathes with complexity and ruthless efficiency. He uses false weights and measures, manipulating his scales so subtly that even experienced merchants cannot immediately detect the dishonesty. A customer believes they purchase 10 yards of cloth but actually receives 8 or 9, the difference vanishing into Kwesi's pockets and adding to his ever-growing fortune. He sells damaged goods as pristine, claiming that marks on fabrics represent natural patterns. He collects counterfeit coins from less scrupulous traders and mixes them into his transactions, passing them on to unsuspecting customers who discover the fraud only later. What makes Kwesi particularly insidious is his charisma and his razor-sharp understanding of human psychology. He knows exactly what words make a buyer comfortable, what smiles disarm suspicion, what stories justify higher prices. He tells elaborate tales about the sources of his fabrics, inventing romantic narratives about caravans crossing dangerous deserts, about artisans in distant kingdoms spending weeks perfecting each thread. Customers don't just buy cloth from Kwesi. They believe they purchase a piece of adventure, a tangible connection to the wider world. This makes them willing to pay premium prices and less likely to scrutinize what they actually receive. Within just 3 years, Kwesi accumulates a fortune that rivals the wealth of established merchant families who have been trading for generations. He purchases a larger stall in the most prestigious section of the marketplace, directly across from the Grand Fountain, where the wealthiest traders conduct their most important transactions. He hires assistants to help manage his growing operation, carefully selecting individuals who are either complicit in his fraud or too naive to understand what happens around them. He begins to wear finer clothes, adorning himself with gold rings and chains that announce his wealth to everyone who passes by. He commissions a new house, a grand structure with multiple rooms and a courtyard, the kind of home that usually takes an honest merchant a lifetime to afford. The other merchants watch with a mixture of envy and suspicion. How has Kwesi risen so quickly? How has a relatively unknown cloth merchant suddenly become one of the wealthiest traders in Kumasi? Whispers circulate through the marketplace, suspicions rise, but nothing concrete gets proven. Kwesi stays careful, meticulous in covering his tracks. When complaints arise, and they do arise with increasing frequency, he has explanations ready. The fabric that deteriorated. The customer must have stored it improperly. The missing yards, the customer must have miscounted. The counterfeit coins, he must have received them unknowingly from another trader. But the victims of his fraud refuse to stay silent. A woman weeps in her home after purchasing cloth for her daughter's wedding, only to have it fall apart on the wedding day, and she tells her family of her humiliation. A tailor who buys premium fabrics to create robes for the governor's family finds that the materials are not what Kwesi promised, and his reputation suffers as a result. An elderly man sells his late wife's jewelry to purchase quality cloth to leave as an inheritance for his grandchildren, only to discover that he has been swindled, and the betrayal nearly breaks him. These are not faceless victims. These are real people with real suffering, their lives damaged by the callous greed of one man. Yet, despite the growing chorus of complaints, Kwesi seems untouchable. He has money now, and money has power. He pays off officials, offers gifts to the guardians of the marketplace, ensures that any formal complaint against him somehow gets lost or overlooked. The marketplace authorities become overwhelmed with disputes and conflicts. Kwesi's victims represent just a few among hundreds of traders and thousands of customers. The system doesn't protect the cheated. It exists to keep commerce flowing, and as long as Kwesi continues to generate transactions and pay his marketplace fees, the authorities have little incentive to investigate him too closely. By the time our story truly begins, Kwesi has operated his fraudulent enterprise for 3 years, and his wealth becomes almost legendary. People whisper that he is the richest merchant in Kumasi, that he possesses more gold than some regional governors, that he has connections to traders so powerful that no one dares to move against him. he begins to believe his own mythology, to see himself as exceptional, as somehow above the rules that govern ordinary people. In his own mind, he ceases to be a fraud. He becomes simply a clever businessman who understands markets better than anyone else. In his own mind, his victims have simply failed to understand the true nature of commerce. On this particular morning, which will become the morning that changes everything, Kwesi wakes in his grand house and looks out at his courtyard with satisfaction that borders on complacency. The sun rises over Kumasi, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and Kwesi feels as though he owns that sky, owns the sun itself. He plans to expand his operations further, perhaps opening a second stall in a neighbouring city, beginning to trade in other commodities beyond fabric. He dresses in his finest clothing, wraps his gold chains around his neck, and prepares for another day of profitable deception. When Kwesi arrives at the marketplace, the morning already bustles with activity. Merchants arrange their goods, customers begin to arrive, and the air fills with the sounds of negotiation and commerce. Kwesi takes his place at his stall, his assistants hovering nearby, ready to process transactions. For the first few hours, business proceeds as it always does. Customers arrive, examine his fabrics, and purchase items at prices they believe to be fair, but which far exceed what the goods are actually worth. Kwesi smiles and makes small talk, the picture of an honest, successful merchant. But around midday, something unusual happens. An old woman appears at his stall, dressed in simple clothes that mark her as someone of modest means. She holds a bolt of fabric that Kwesi recognizes immediately. It is one he sold several months earlier, a piece of cloth he deliberately adulterated with inferior materials. The fabric has begun to deteriorate, the colours running, the threads becoming weak. The old woman looks at him with eyes that seem far older than her face suggests, eyes that hold not anger but something else, something Kwesi cannot quite identify. "Merchant Kwesi," the old woman says, her voice carrying a strange quality, a resonance that echoes through the marketplace even though she speaks quietly. "I purchased this cloth from you half a year ago. I pay you a sum that takes me months to save. I plan to wear it on important occasions, to treasure it as a reminder of my travels to this great marketplace. But look at it now. It falls apart, the colours run, the threads break. I come to ask you what you intend to do about this." Kwesi's first instinct is to fall back on his usual explanations, to claim that the woman must have stored the fabric improperly or that she washed it with the wrong methods. But something about this old woman's presence makes him pause. There is a power in her stillness, a certainty in her gaze that suggests she will not be moved by his usual excuses. Yet Kwesi's greed and his arrogance override his instinct. He has successfully deceived thousands of customers. What is one more old woman? "You must understand," Kwesi begins, his voice taking on the smooth, explanatory tone he uses with difficult customers, "that I cannot be responsible for how you care for this fabric. The quality of cloth deteriorates for many reasons: improper storage, harsh washing, exposure to humidity. I sell you fine cloth. What you do with it after the sale is not my concern. If you damage it foolishly, that is hardly my fault." The old woman looks at him for a long moment, and something flickers across her face. Not anger, but something like disappointment, like she confirms something she has already suspected. She carefully folds the damaged fabric and holds it against her chest. "I see," she says quietly. "So you admit that you sell me this cloth, knowing full well that it is inferior to what I pay for." You admit that you deceive me and countless others, taking money that is earned through honest labor and using it to line your own pockets. You admit that you have no shame, no regret, and no intention of making things right. I admit nothing, Quasi snaps, suddenly irritated by this woman's persistence and her refusal to accept his explanations. I sell you cloth at a fair price, and what happens after that is your responsibility. Now, if you have no intention of making another purchase, I suggest you move along. You take up space at my stall and deter other customers. The old woman stands there for a moment longer, and in that moment, Quasi notices something strange. The other merchants around them go quiet. Customers stop their shopping. Everyone in the immediate vicinity of his stall watches this exchange, though no one seems to want to draw attention to themselves by looking directly at the old woman. It is as if the entire marketplace collectively holds its breath. Very well, the old woman says, and her voice seems to carry a weight that Quasi does not quite understand. A quality that makes the hair on the back of his neck stand up despite his determination to remain unmoved. If that is your answer, then so be it. Before sunrise tomorrow, Quasi, you will understand the full measure of what you have done. Before the light of morning breaks over Kumasi, you will face a reckoning that no amount of gold or clever words will be able to escape. This is not a threat or a curse. It is simply what will be. It is the way of things when a man has cheated so thoroughly that the very universe cannot ignore his deception. With that, the old woman turns and walks away from his stall, disappearing into the crowd of the marketplace. Quasi watches her go, and for just a moment he feels something like fear. But it passes quickly, replaced by his usual arrogance and dismissal. An old woman spouting mystical nonsense is hardly something to concern himself with. He has faced far worse than cryptic warnings and vague threats. As the afternoon progresses, Quasi continues his business as usual, selling adulterated fabrics at premium prices, manipulating his scales, accepting counterfeit coins, and smiling at customers with the practiced ease of someone who has perfected deception into an art form. But something nags at the back of his mind, something about the old woman's words that refuses to be dismissed entirely. Before sunrise, she had said, before the light of morning breaks over Kumasi. What could possibly happen before sunrise that would constitute a reckoning? By the time the sun begins to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, Quasi has pushed the encounter out of his conscious mind. He closes his stall as he always does, counts his profits for the day, a considerable sum, as always, and makes his way home. His assistants have gone for the day, and he walks through the marketplace alone, past stalls being shut down for the evening, past merchants packing away their unsold goods. When he reaches his home, Quasi prepares his evening meal, then settles into the courtyard to enjoy a drink of palm wine while the sun completes its descent below the horizon. The night feels pleasant, cool, and filled with the sounds of crickets and distant voices. He thinks about his plans for expansion, about the new city where he intends to open another stall, about the even greater wealth he will accumulate. He thinks about the old woman's words, and he smiles at the absurdity of them. What reckoning could possibly come before sunrise? The universe remains indifferent to human morality. The world cares nothing for justice or fairness. Around midnight, Quasi retires to his bedroom, his mind at ease, his conscience as quiet as it has become over the past 3 years of deception. He lies down on his fine bed, surrounded by the luxury that his fraudulent earnings have purchased, and he closes his eyes. He expects to fall asleep within moments, as he always does, his mind comfortable and undisturbed by any sense of wrongdoing. But sleep does not come. Instead, something strange begins to happen. At first, Kwesi thinks it is merely the discomfort of too much palm wine, or perhaps something in his evening meal that disagrees with him. He feels a tingling sensation beginning in his fingers, a strange prickling that gradually spreads up his arms toward his shoulders. He gets out of bed and lights a lamp, examining his hands in the flickering light. At first, there is nothing to see, nothing physically wrong. But the sensation continues to intensify, spreading now to his legs, a crawling, creeping feeling that moves across his entire body like insects beneath his skin. Kwesi tries to dismiss it, tries to return to bed, but the sensation grows more intense. He begins to scratch at his skin, trying to alleviate the uncomfortable prickling, but this only seems to make it worse. His entire body feels like it burns with this crawling sensation, and he finds himself moving restlessly around his home, trying to find some position or action that provides relief. Nothing works. The sensation only continues to intensify, spreading through every nerve in his body. Then, around 3 in the morning, something far more disturbing occurs. Kwesi happens to glance down at his hands, and in the lamplight, he sees something that makes his blood run cold. His skin changes. It becomes rougher, more textured, developing a peculiar pattern that resembles scales. He holds his hands up to the light, examining them closely, and he realizes with mounting horror that his skin literally transforms, becoming covered in what appears to be scales, like those of a reptile. Kwesi begins to panic. He rushes to the nearest mirror and looks at his face, and what he sees nearly drives him mad. His entire face gets covered in these strange scales, his features beginning to shift and change. His nose becomes more pointed, his eyes larger and more prominent, his mouth spreading wider. The transformation happens quickly, inexorably, and Kwesi is powerless to stop it. He tries to call for help, but his voice changes, becoming harsher and less human. His hands are now fully covered in scales, his fingers beginning to fuse together. The transformation continues, spreading from his face and hands to his entire body. Kwesi runs through his home in a panic, searching for some way to stop what happens, for some explanation or remedy. But there is nothing. By the time dawn approaches, perhaps 2 hours away, Kwesi's transformation nears completion. He is no longer recognizable as a human being. His entire body becomes covered in shimmering scales that catch what little light comes through the windows of his home. His body becomes elongated and twisted, his limbs proportioned differently than they have been. He becomes something else, something inhuman, something that resembles a serpent or some other creature that has no proper name in human language. And as the transformation nears completion, Kwesi's mind transforms as well. His memories of being human become vague and dreamlike, replaced by strange new instincts and perceptions. He can see in the dark with perfect clarity. His new eyes, far superior to his human eyes, have ever been. He can sense the vibrations in the air, can detect the body heat of the mice that live in the walls of his home. He can feel the pull of his new form toward the ground, a desire to slither rather than walk. As the first hints of dawn break over Kumasi, as the sun just begins its rise above the horizon, Kwesi's transformation reaches its absolute completion. He is no longer Kwesi the cloth merchant. He is no longer even remotely human. He becomes a creature of nightmares, a massive serpent with scales that glint like polished metal in the growing light of day. His old consciousness still resides somewhere within this new form, still aware of who he has been, still capable of understanding the full measure of his horror and despair. When the servants come to check on their master as sunrise breaks fully over the city, they find his home in chaos. Furniture lies overturned, walls bear strange patterns, and in the center of it all coils a massive serpent, longer than a man is tall, its scales shimmering with an otherworldly light. The servants scream and flee, spreading the news throughout Kumasi with incredible speed. Kwesi the cloth merchant, the wealthiest trader in the marketplace, the man who has risen so quickly to power and wealth, has been transformed into a serpent sometime during the night. By the time the sun rises fully and morning becomes well established, a crowd gathers at Kwesi's home. The marketplace erupts into chaos as the news spreads. Merchants who have been cheated by Kwesi over the past 3 years come forward with their stories of deception. Customers who have been sold inferior goods reveal their hidden resentments and anger. Families who have been ruined by fraud speak openly of their suffering. And at the center of it all, the massive serpent remains in Kwesi's home, hissing and writhing in its anguish and confusion. The local authorities come to investigate, baffled by what has occurred. Is this some kind of curse, some form of dark magic? They question the old woman at the marketplace, the one who confronted Kwesi just the day before, but she cannot be found. It is as if she has vanished completely, leaving only her cryptic warning in Kwesi's mind and the undeniable proof of its fulfillment in his transformed body. Scholars and priests get consulted, but no one can explain what has happened. Some say it is divine punishment for his greed and deception. Others whisper that the old woman is not human at all, but some form of supernatural being sent to administer justice. Still, others suggest that the transformation is a lesson meant not just for Kwesi, but for all the merchants and traders of Kumasi. A reminder that the universe has its own sense of balance, and that those who cheat others will eventually face a reckoning that no amount of wealth or cleverness can prevent. The serpent that has once been Kwesi cannot speak to defend itself or explain what has happened. It can only hiss and slither, trapped in a form it cannot escape, aware of its former humanity but unable to return to it. The gold and jewelry that Kwesi has accumulated over years of fraud remains in his home, useless to him now, unable to purchase any relief from his suffering. His grand house becomes a place that people avoid, a monument to the dangers of unbridled greed and deception. Some of the victims of Kwesi's fraud come to see the serpent, standing outside his home and looking at the creature with expressions that range from satisfaction to pity. The old man, whose wife's jewelry has been sold so that he can be cheated, comes and looks at the serpent. And afterward, he says that he feels no joy in Kwesi's suffering. The woman whose daughter's wedding has been ruined by inferior fabric comes and looks, and tears stream down her face. Not tears of revenge, but tears for the waste of a human life, for the tragedy of a man who chooses greed over integrity and pays a price far greater than any earthly punishment. In the weeks that follow, Kwesi's transformation becomes a legend whispered throughout Kumasi and beyond. The story spreads to other cities and regions, carried by traders who travel the roads, told and retold until it becomes almost mythical in nature. The tale of the cloth merchant who cheats the entire marketplace and gets transformed into a serpent before sunrise becomes a cautionary story, told by parents to children, invoked by merchants when they face temptation to engage in fraud, referenced by judges when they render decisions about disputes. The transformation of Quasi serves as a profound reminder of a truth that many merchants face danger of forgetting, that the world has its own sense of justice, that actions carry consequences that cannot be escaped, no matter how clever one is or how much wealth one accumulates. The universe, it seems, has ways of balancing the scales that exist beyond human understanding or prediction. And for those like Quasi who cheat and defraud, who take advantage of the vulnerable and the trusting, there eventually comes a reckoning that arrives swift and terrible and absolutely inescapable. Years pass, and the marketplace of Kumasi continues to function, but something has changed in the hearts and minds of the traders. Quasi's fate serves as a constant, silent reminder that integrity matters, that honesty carries value, that the trust of customers represents something sacred and not to be violated for the sake of quick profits. New merchants establish themselves with reputations for fairness and honesty, and these merchants prosper and grow wealthy in ways that seem to exceed even those who engage in fraud. It is as if the universe itself rewards those who choose the path of integrity and punishes those who choose deception. And in his home, alone and transformed, Quasi lives out his days as a serpent, a creature that has once been human but can never be human again. He cannot die, or so it seems. His transformation has granted him a kind of immortality, a curse that perhaps becomes more terrible than death itself. He is forced to witness, from his inhuman perspective, the full consequences of his actions, to see how his deception harms people, how his greed damages lives, how his betrayal of trust leaves scars on the community of merchants and traders that he has once belonged to. Some say that on quiet nights, if one passes by Quasi's home, one can hear the serpent hiss, and in that hissing there seem to be words, fragments of human language, perhaps pleas for forgiveness or expressions of regret. Others claim that the old woman who confronts Quasi in the marketplace is not human at all, but rather a manifestation of justice itself, a force that moves through the world, ensuring that balance gets maintained, and that those who cheat face a reckoning that is both swift and proportionate. The story of Quasi becomes immortal in the culture of Kumasi, passed down through generations, adapted and reinterpreted, but never losing its essential truth. And in the marketplace, where commerce and trade continue as they always have, honest merchants sometimes point to Quasi's home, that grand structure that stands empty except for its serpentine inhabitant, and remind their children and apprentices of the most fundamental rule of business and of life itself, that integrity cannot be bought or sold, that deception always carries a price far greater than any profit, and that the universe, in its mysterious ways, always settles the score. Before sunrise, the old woman said, and her words prove prophetic and absolutely true. Before the light of morning breaks over Kumasi, Quasi receives his reckoning, transformed from a successful merchant into a serpent, his greed and deception written into the very fabric of his being, visible to all who see him. And in that transformation, he discovers what money and cleverness can never teach him, that some prices cannot be paid in gold, that some debts cannot be settled with profit, and that the consequences of dishonesty can follow a person for eternity, written into their very existence, impossible to escape, impossible to deny. This is the story that the marketplace of Kumasi tells to this day, the story of Kwesi, who cheats the entire marketplace and faces a reckoning that shocks everyone before the sun rises. It is a story of greed and consequence, of justice and transformation, of the universe maintaining its balance through means that mortals can barely comprehend. And it remains a powerful reminder, whispered in marketplaces and homes, that integrity is the truest wealth, that deception always catches up with the deceiver, and that some lessons can only be learned through paying a price so terrible that it transcends all earthly understanding.
Subscribe for more amazing African stories.